All right. So, so I'd like to present Dr. Diane Gilbert-Diamond and Reina Lansigan, who will offer the first presentation, researching the health effects of mindfulness training in children. So I'll share a little bit about both of our invited guests and speakers. So Professor Diane Gilbert-Diamond received her AB from Dartmouth College with a focus in biology in 1998, and her Doctor of Science from Harvard School of Public Health with a focus in Nutritional Epidemiology in 2010. She then completed a postdoctoral research fellowship at the Geisel School of Medicine in Bioinformatics and was appointed to the faculty at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth in 2012. Her research lab focuses on gene-environment interactions related to child health. She's currently conducting a National Institute of Health-funded study that explores the relationships between specific obesity-related genotypes, brain responses measured via fMRI, and eating behaviors. And Reina Lansigan received her master's in social work from Columbia University School of Social Work and BA in psychology with a minor in music from New York University. Over the years, she has investigated the influence of stereotypes on information search patterns, Head Start policy and child outcome, and efficacy of housing programs for homeless individuals with dual diagnosis. She's particularly interested in the intersection of environmental health, behavioral health, and social justice. Outside of academia, she formerly practiced as a psychotherapist and a clinical consultant to Connecticut's Department of Children and Families, and is also a professional dancer. So please welcome our first guest. And maybe we'll practice in the Plum Village tradition. We'll greet our guests by standing and bowing, and in gratitude for their presentation.
Thank you, everyone, for having us speak today. I feel very, very honored to be here and very appreciative to have the chance to come to the retreat first and experience this wonderful tradition and practice. And as Brother Faplu was saying, some of us came to this collaboration with more experience with mindfulness, and some came with less. More experience with scientific research, and I was more on the scientific research side of the collaboration. So this has been just an amazing experience, and I hugged a rock for the first time today, so that kind of sums up my experience, so thank you. So today we're going to speak about a collaboration between Plum Village, the Harvard School of Public Health, and the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. So next slide, please. And before I talk about the work that we've done together, I want to give you a little context about the work that Reina and I have been doing for the last decade. So next slide. So you may or may not know, but in this country, 1 in 3 children has obesity, overweight or obesity. So they're carrying extra body fat, which is related to health problems, sometimes asthma, joint pains, and even we're seeing in adolescents type 2 diabetes, liver issues. And if a child gains this excess weight as a child, they're very, very likely to carry it throughout their lives. And in addition to the physical ailments, obesity is still very, very stigmatized in our country. And in fact, I think of it as almost the last acceptable bias. So even in professional settings where individuals may not be comfortable anymore making other types of inappropriate jokes, you'll still hear jokes about obesity. So I would like us all to recognize that individuals with obesity are very stigmatized in our country. And so part of what drew me to this research is that it's a very, very prevalent condition that many people are facing, but we still think of it as an individual issue. That individual should try harder, eat better, exercise more, and take care of themselves, and they have a personal failing. And it's not just in the non-scientific medical communities that these messages are given. In fact, after families, medical providers are reported by individuals with obesity as the second most prominent source of bias against them. And that, I think, is really important to recognize, that individuals who are supposed to take care of health are actually presenting bias that interferes with health. I didn't mean to go on that path, but I'll come back to this. So anyways, I have a very profound feeling of wanting to impact the world by helping individuals prevent obesity and treat obesity. So next slide, please. So we all have experienced eating, which is I'd like you to draw upon right now. And we all have very, very complicated biological processes that precisely regulate how much we take into our bodies in terms of calories and how much we expend. So if we're in a famine state, our metabolisms will slow down to compensate for our lack of calories. And if an individual gains weight and then starts losing it, their metabolism will slow down to protect that energy that they've worked to build in their bodies. And these mechanisms are very refined by evolution and very good. It's not, we all can gain excess weight, but it's very slow. So if you imagine having to calculate exactly what you eat and figure out what you need for the activity levels you did in the day, it would take all of your time, right? But our bodies just do that. But our bodies aren't perfect at that. So there can be a little imbalance, and we can slowly put on excess weight, and that can accumulate over time. But I do want us to recognize that our bodies are amazing, that it's not haywire, that one day, the next day, that we fluctuate very quickly. So it's a very good process, but it's not perfect. And a lot of the perturbation of that process, the challenge to that process, is our environment. So we have an apple up here to represent kind of wholesome foods, the types of foods that are presented here in this community for us to be nourished. And it's very hard to gain excess weight when you only have these nutrient-rich foods. It's easier for us to regulate because our homeostatic biological processes are better at managing those foods. But currently, our environment is full of processed foods that are very high in sugar, very high in fat and salt, and refined. So, if we eat, if you've had the experience of eating a whole wheat cookie with nuts and everything, it actually takes longer for you to eat it, right? But then imagine like a Twinkie or something. It's so easy to get so many calories at once. And so our biology, our physiology, has not really evolved to sense easily these highly processed foods and help us figure out how to balance. And the other thing that these highly processed foods do is they light up our reward centers in our brain. And our brain is like ding, 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 ding. Because if you are wandering in a day and only have a little bit of time to get your nutrition, a Twinkie is like gold, right? Because it's so light and it's so full of calories, and you can just get those calories so easily. So our brain responds to these foods really, really strongly. And so our genetics haven't changed quickly. They evolve over time, but it takes so much time. But the rates of obesity in our country and in the world have increased much more quickly than evolution could ever compensate for. So we have this pandemic of obesity in our world that is leading to many health, mental, physical health problems because of our environment. And let's go to the next slide, please. I want to point out food advertising as one particular environmental source that can cause a lot of excess eating. So the food industry spends $1.8 billion a year advertising to children under 12 years old. So there's a lot of money to market really unhealthy foods to kids, even though 1 in 3 kids in our country has overweight or obesity. It's criminal, I think. I mean, I don't know if that's too political to say, but we're actively giving these messages to our kids to eat these foods that are leading to impacts. So part of what we are doing is trying to build the evidence to say to policymakers, this exposure is having this impact, and it's our public health, it's impacting our public health, and we have a responsibility to protect our children. Similarly to how we stopped advertising cigarettes after cartoons. So some of you may be old enough to remember cigarette advertisements coming on after the Flintstones. That's not done anymore. So maybe Trix advertisements can stop coming on after the, whatever TV show they're watching. So we're trying to build an evidence base to help guide policy and also to help individuals understand themselves. What is the impact of these sources into our senses on our actions? So the actions and reactions. Next slide, please. Oh, so you can't see the right bar, but this is, what I wanted to express here is we did a study where we measured how many kilocalories children ate. So these were 9 to 11-year-old children. And what we do is we first give them lunch until they're full. And after they're full, we provide them snacks to eat, highly palatable, Cheetos and, gummy bears and Oreos, like all these things, after they ate. So this is kind of like the pie after Thanksgiving dinner, or the dessert after a big feast. And what we found is that when we show kids a TV show with food advertising versus a TV show with toys or other neutral advertising, the kids eat more of the snacks while they're watching the TV with food ads. And in this graph, you can see this difference here, and other labs have also found this. And it's this average effect over many kids. But then our question was, next slide, please. Are some kids genetically predisposed to be more affected? So from your own personal experience, you may have experience in yourself and other people. Some people will walk past, a plate of cookies, and they just walk past and they keep going. For some people, they walk past and they're like, whoa, and they feel that drive, right, to go to those foods, no matter if they've had lunch or not. And so again, to what Brother Faplu said, all of this research is based on observations of ourselves and other people that we then try to formalize into these scientific questions and research. And so we wanted to know whether these kids have different effects of the advertising. And part of that is because when you look at the last graph, that's averaged. And if you have some kids that are really, really vulnerable, the kids who are most likely to gain excess weight and develop overweight or obesity, we want to protect them. But we may not see the magnitude of the effect if we average them together with a lot of kids who aren't affected. So next slide, please. So this is the results of our study. I think maybe the first paper we published together, where we genotyped the kids, and we saw one single nucleotide in their whole genome in a gene called FTO, fat mass and obesity related gene. And this gene was first identified for type 2 diabetes and obesity. And we measured this in the kids. And these kids on this side, the TT closest to me, are the kids who have a low genetic risk for obesity related to this one spot. And what you're seeing on this axis is how much extra food they consumed in the food ad condition versus neutral ad condition. And you can see it's 0. There's some variability there, but it centers around 0. So these are the kids who just, their internal signals matter more to them, or they experience them more. They're not as affected by the advertisements. But then when you move to the middle group, they have one obesity risk allele and one non-risk allele. And they ate about 55 more calories. This is in 20 minutes. How long? 20 minutes. They ate 55 extra calories when they're exposed to food ads versus not. So you can think about extending that through their whole childhood. And then you move to the higher risk group on that side. And that is about 130 extra calories in the 20 minutes, just from seeing, the Saturday morning cartoons. So to us, this was very meaningful. We are showing an environment of these kids' genetics with the environment. And something that touched me is when I was talking about this on the radio, like a radio call-in thing in New Hampshire Public Radio. Someone called in and just tears, and she felt like an understanding of herself and felt like she could let go of some of the blame of herself, because she always wondered why that person next to her could have the self-control and she couldn't. And to me, part of what this is showing is that the drive is different. It's not just a matter of self-control, it's the attraction that can vary as well. And so for her, that helped her to feel a little more compassion for herself, which I found very rewarding. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, in addition to doing this experimental study where we interrogate how much they eat, we also can look at the neurons firing in their brains. And what you're seeing lit up here are some of those reward regions that I had mentioned earlier. So this is the nucleus accumbens that is circled. And again, that reward region lights up more with food ads versus non-food ads. And we demonstrated and published in this paper that those with more genetic risk had more activation in these brain reward regions in response to food versus non-food ads. So that was kind of confirmatory because we had this mechanism that may make the food more rewarding for them. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also want to look at little kids, 3, 4-year-olds. And the last slide was in an MRI. And I don't know if any of you have been in an MRI, but you have to go into like a tunnel. And 3 and 4-year-olds can't do that comfortably. So we started collaborating with someone in our lab named Dr. John Brand, who does eye tracking. And as you have been looking at this slide, maybe you can notice what your eyes do. And first, you kind of have a general attention, and then your eye will be drawn to one image. And then maybe it will leave that image, come back, and go around. And what we do is we use a camera that's focused on pupils to measure that eye movement. And we look at something called a fixation, which is about 1/4 of a second. And we track those. And I don't know if you can you might not be able to remember, maybe you can, what first drew your attention. The cookie, the drum, or what do you keep coming back to? So next slide, please. So this is what our data from eye tracking looks like. And every one of those black dots is one of those fixations. And behind the heat map, or the colors, are actually images of food and non-food. And this was a game we played with 3-year-olds where they look around and try to find this little cartoon monster, and we just let their eyes wander and we see what they focus on. So that's one example of our eye tracking. Next slide. Is the volume okay? Next slide, please. Okay, sorry. Back one, thank you. So this is a game we play with older kids, and in the middle is the game Tetris, back from, I don't know if you've played it recently, so you move the blocks, and so as they're playing it, food and non-food images come up periodically, and they're asked to play the game, and their eyes wander. Maybe just for 1/4 of a second, and they come back and they wander. And this, you can think of yourselves, maybe reading a news article, and then the ads come up. And how much do they draw your attention, and for how long? And so we measure 2 things. We measure the time it takes to fixate on the very first object. And that's very telling. It's not a conscious choice, and your eyes will just go there. And even if you don't stay for a long time, they'll go, how quickly do you fixate on the donut or the polar bear? And we assumed polar bear was non-food in this form, but thinking about it, maybe that's 2 foods up here. I don't know, for some people. So we measure how quickly you go first, and then how long people's eyes settle on those. And these images alternate over time. Okay, so that we use those as measures of attention. Next slide, please. Okay. So then we were left with this question. We have observed, I forgot to mention, these eye tracking measures in our 3-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 17-year-olds, we found that they're related to current weight, and also how much people eat, kids eat in this EAH paradigm. So that is a piece you can carry forward. So we were at this point where now we have this information, but we had a question: how do you intervene? How do you help to change behaviors? And I essentially gave this talk at Harvard, this same background that I just gave to you now. And it was not as calm of an experience for me. It was very nerve-wracking. And because I was speaking to like my former professors, and there was this woman standing in the back, and she was smiling, this like beatific smile, and standing very stilly, and kind of projecting this like warmth up to me, and it really calmed me down. And that woman was Dr. Lillian Chung, who wrote Savor with Thich Nhat Hanh. And after my presentation, and I left with that same question: how do we intervene? And so after the presentation, she came up to me and she said, you know, we need to work together, and I know how we should intervene. We should do mindfulness training. And Reina and I had been exploring this question, and we're doing research with multitasking and attentional training. And Reina has more experience exploring different mindfulness trainings than I do. But we hadn't been with experts. And so Reina, so Dr. Chung brought us together with Brother Phap Lu. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. So this is Dr. Chung. Next slide, please. Oh, and she's there too. Hi, Lillian. Next slide, please. And this is Brother Phap Lu, who's also right here. And then the next slide, please. And Dr. Orla O'Sullivan, who works with the Plum Village tradition in children. And so Reina and I met with Brother Phap Lu and Orla and Lillian for the beginning of the pandemic via Zoom. And we started exploring how to intervene using their expertise and our knowledge of experiments and design a study to figure this out. So I'm going to pass it to Reina, but first I think we can have one more sound of the bell. If someone can help me with that. No? Oh, yes, thank you. I didn't even know you had a bell there. Okay, thank you.
Dear community, hi, I am Reina. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Brother Phap Lu and Diane. It is such an honor and privilege to be here. As Diane mentioned, mindfulness practice has been a personal interest and passion of mine. And professionally, I've had the pleasure of researching children's eating behavior with Diane for over 10 years now. And for those two to converge in this form is truly a dream come true for me. So thank you so much. So I may be speaking to the choir here, but what is mindful eating? I just want to start out by defining that. So it is the non-judgmental awareness of things like internal and external cues to eat. So internal signals to eat are things like hunger and fullness, satiety cues. How does your stomach feel in this moment? And external cues are things like advertisement that Diane talked about, food advertisements. It could also be a sight or smell of food. And as Diane mentioned also, some people have a harder time resisting those cues. There's also food choice. What kind of foods are we consuming? Are we consuming wholesome, whole foods like the foods we've been eating here? Or are we putting processed foods into our mouth that are high in energy but low in nutrients? And consumption quantity. How much of the foods are we eating? Are we eating beyond the sensation of satiety? And there's also eating rate, and the factors that go into that are how big is your bite size, how much pause you're taking in between bites, and how many times you're chewing. And how the food is consumed. Let's focus on that. Are we eating by ourselves? Are we eating in a car on the way somewhere? Eating an energy bar? Are we eating at a table with community? You get the idea. So here you see 2 guinea pigs about to eat an apple here. But the act of eating, when you reflect on all of these elements, including where food comes from also, who prepared the foods, who went to get the foods from the store if it came from the store, and how did this food grow? How was it grown? What elements all went into it? There's water, the sun, the soil, and the farmers. And if we're missing a single element out of all of these, the food, this apple, wouldn't be here in front of you. So in this way, the act of eating an apple isn't just eating an apple, but it becomes a spiritual act and a deep meditation on the cosmos and the fact that everything is related. Next slide, please. And as you're all familiar with 5 contemplations that we practice before eating meals, this is a particular one that's been adapted for children by Tai, and I'd like to read it out to you because I think it's such a beautiful contemplation. The food is the gift of the whole universe, the earth, the sky, the rain, and the sun. We thank the people who have made this food, especially the farmers, the people at the market, and the cooks. We only put on our plate as much food as we can eat. We want to chew the food slowly so that we can enjoy it. This food gives us energy to practice being more loving and understanding. We eat this food in order to be healthy and happy and to love each other as a family. I introduced this to my kids and tried to practice it at home. They're 2 teenagers and hasn't quite worked, but the intention is there. Next slide, please. So, of course, when the collaboration, our team has come together during the pandemic, we started reviewing the literature on mindfulness and eating, particularly in children. So in the past 2 decades, there's been a surge in randomized control trials in mindfulness interventions. As you all know, subjectively, from that standpoint, that mindfulness, of course, it works for kids to adapt healthier eating behaviors, but we need some data to demonstrate that. So as many of you, I'm sure, are familiar, Jon Kabat-Zinn's MBSR, or mindfulness-based stress reduction, has been clinically demonstrated to be efficacious for things like depression, anxiety, stress, chronic pain, addiction, and also obesity and eating behaviors. But mindfulness-based interventions have been primarily studied among clinical adult populations. And there's been a gap in research in the area of mindful eating in children. And Diane and I and our team are particularly interested in children's eating behavior of those kids that are not necessarily in clinical conditions and are struggling with eating disorders or obesity, but kids that are relatively considered to be healthy, and how mindfulness training can affect those kids' eating behaviors. Next slide, please. And as we were conducting our literature review, we came across this study that was particularly illuminating. It was conducted by Jordan and et al. It's a series of 4 related studies done with college kids. And they found that those students who regularly practice mindfulness, maybe it was in the form of yoga or meditation, and those seasoned practitioners of mindfulness demonstrated less impulsive eating, healthier snack choices, and also increased preferences for healthier food choices. And what they also found, which was particularly interesting to us, is that you didn't have to be a seasoned mindfulness practitioner to achieve a state of mindfulness. So what they did was they put students one by one into a room with a yoga mat, and they played an audio recording, just 15 minutes of a body scan meditation. And just that single exercise of 15-minute guided meditation led to fewer calories consumed when they were given free access to snack foods afterwards. So what this study is demonstrating is that mindfulness encourages healthier eating even without the specific instruction to eat mindfully, which gives us hope, because naturally we think if we train children to eat mindfully, they may adapt those skills and make healthier choices. But then, if we train kids on mindfulness comprehensively, maybe even without specific instruction for mindful eating, it may still lead to the kids eating mindfully as a result. Next slide, please. So, how can we train children to become mindful given the constraint that we cannot work with children in person because, as Diane has mentioned, this study was conceived at the height of the pandemic, and we could not meet with children in person. So our team has met many times over Zoom, and we had some really interesting discussions back and forth about what is the best way to go about remotely training children on mindfulness. And what we ended up agreeing on was to create this 30-minute video that is, we tried to make it as experiential as possible, so the kids are not passively viewing this video, but actually we're taking them through these mindfulness exercises. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, thank you. So, some of the questions we had were, our population of interest was 9 to 12-year-old children. And is it even feasible, first of all, to do this mindfulness training remotely? To our knowledge, nobody has ever conducted such an intervention in a remote fashion. So our team is the first to our knowledge. And is it going to be well accepted by the children? And the second question we had is, what is the impact of that remote training on the kids' eating behavior, and particularly their attention to food cues that's measured by eye tracking, and their overconsumption, which is measured in the eating in the absence of hunger paradigm. So that is to say, we feed children a regular meal, have them eat until they're full, and then we give them free access to snack foods, and we see how much they overconsume those snack foods. Next slide, please. And I want to give you an idea of what this experiential mindfulness training video looked like. So, Brother Kenley, if you could start the video. And this is Brother Blue guiding the children. Would you fast forward, Brother Kenley? To 9:42, I believe. And this is Brother Blue guiding the children through pebble meditation. And I'd just like to show a brief clip of it just so you get the idea. Thank you, Brother Kenley. Next, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit now about study design, what our study looked like. So we decided to show this mindfulness video over Zoom to children. So there will be a research assistant guiding the child through the study sessions. And we decided to try use eye tracking to measure the kids' attention to food and non-food cues, and also eating in the absence of hunger. And then, because this is a randomized study, we would have the experimental condition and, of course, also the control condition. So for the experimental condition, we show the children the mindfulness training video. And then for the control condition, we decided to adapt Dr. Lillian Chung's wellness curriculum for children called Eat Well and Keep Moving. And we adapted it for our needs. And we created a video. Our team got together and created a video. And we also tried to make it as experiential and engaging as possible, without particular emphasis on mindfulness. So I included things like emphasis on importance of sleep, physical activity, nutrition, reduction of screen time. So you get the idea. And given that the kids are remote, we send all the study equipment that they need ahead of time to the families. So that included a laptop and a portable eye tracker, and also a meal, the same meal that families can easily prepare, and snack foods. Next slide, please. And this is the flow of the 2 randomized sessions. So in this case, the kids are serving as their own control. So in the first session, if they're exposed to the mindfulness training video, in the following Zoom session, they would be watching the control video, which is the general wellness education video. So first, before the study appointment, the child will be eating this standardized meal until they're full. And then what we do next is we have them multitask on the laptop screen. And here they're playing Pac-Man as they're instructed to also pay attention simultaneously to a cartoon video that's playing. And the reason why we did this is we wanted to perturb their cognitive system a little bit, because multitasking is directly antithetical to mindfulness, because you're focusing on multiple stimuli at the same time. So we thought that if we perturb their cognitive system first, maybe we'll see a bigger effect size from the mindfulness training. And then so every child would watch either a mindfulness video or the wellness video, but then before and after they watch the video, their eye movements would be tracked as they're playing Tetris and all these distractors are appearing at the side of the screen. Some are food cues and some are non-food cues. And then, because playing Tetris in and of itself could be distracting and inducing mindlessness, we decided to introduce a refresher of the training that they just received. In this case, we have them, in the mindfulness condition, we have them, there's a short audio that is reciting the 5 contemplations for children. And it's followed by the eating in the absence of hunger phase, where the children have free access to snack foods, and the foods are measured pre and post, so that we can calculate how many calories they consumed. And throughout the studies, we have questionnaires peppered throughout, both for the children as well as parents. So we're measuring things like children's mindfulness states, and also their self-compassion, and how that some of those may be changing over time, and also satiety, measures of satiety. And next slide, please. And so far, and if you could click through, yes. And so far, we have about 10 children enrolled in the study. Given that it's a pilot study, it's a very brand new study, our sample size is 20, so we're about halfway through. And we really value the feedback that we've received so far from both the children and the parents. And of course, we were worried about how this remote intervention will be received by the children and their parents. But so far we've received feedback such as, I think Zoom was fine, it wasn't really hard. And some of the kids were already familiar with mindfulness concepts, which was very encouraging. Some of them actually even have a meditation practice of their own. I think it's wonderful that it's been being introduced in schools from an early age. And then there was some encouraging feedback, such as, I was excited to eat the goldfish and gummy bears and didn't end up eating much after the videos. It really made me think of what I would be eating. And yeah, I think some of the kids felt really relaxed after watching the mindfulness video. And we also received feedback that the video was a little bit long. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And yes, next slide, thank you. And we received encouraging parallel feedback from parents as well. We were so concerned about how this is going to be received by the families, but the parents, a lot of parents actually said they loved being able to do Zoom participate in studies over Zoom because it was convenient. They could be doing some work at the same time. And if you could click through the quotes. Yeah, and I don't think my child has any awkwardness about Zoom. COVID kids are built differently, which is an illuminating comment. And then we also received some feedback that this is a great concept. I really love it, but I think it needs repetitions, reminders, and we wholeheartedly agree. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, even though we've been collaborating for 2 years now, the study is still very much in its infancy. We hope to apply for an NIH grant and turn this into a longitudinal, much larger study. And we believe that the intervention is much more effective if we can involve the whole family as opposed to dealing with children in isolation. So that is our plan. And aside from conducting remote intervention studies, we are interested in being able to study the effects of mindfulness training in a school setting. And of course, you can expect so much from just having kids watch a 30-minute mindfulness video once. And in the future, we want to make this into a long-term intervention, starting out with an 8-week intervention. So there will be repeated reminders and engagement with a research assistant, so the kids will be regularly checking in with an adult figure and checking in on their progress. And we're not only interested in kids' eating behavior, but the effects of mindfulness training on their wellness, overall wellness too, including mental health, as well as overweight status, maybe how that changes over time, and sense of well-being, self-compassion. Those outcomes. Thank you. Next slide, please. And I want to extend our gratitude, of course, to Thai Cheknahan. Without him, none of us would be here together today. And the Byrne Foundation that has generously funded our study. And our collaborators, Brother Faplu, having such an important role in the study, but also for inviting us here. And Dr. Lillian Chung, who's Zooming in today. And Orla, who is a part of the community and has been such an integral part of this team. And also to Rhonda Fabian, who is a longtime member of this tradition and has played a critical role in putting the videos together. She spent countless hours helping us produce that video. She is a professional children's educational video producer. And of course, to all members of the Plum Village community and to members of our research team, Dr. John Brand, who has expertise in eye tracking and has helped us so much in designing the eye tracking paradigm, and to our research assistants, Delana Carlson and Grace Ballerino, who have run many study sessions with the kids and families. And next slide, please. Next slide. Do you have any questions? A comment?
So thank you so much, Diane and Reina. So it's a beautiful presentation. It's a little bit short on time. So what we can do is, if you have any questions, you can write them down or make a note somehow for yourself, and we'll have the session at the end. So if there are any specific questions, so we can have a short break now, and maybe we can just stand up for a moment and bow in gratitude to our presenters and the wonderful research they've done. Thank you. So we have about 7 minutes if you need to use the bathroom or anything, but please, if you're just fine, you can just remain here, and we'll start the next presentation by Joanne in 6 minutes, 7 minutes.